Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Okay, so we have a 45-minute window for our Q&A. So just to give everyone a little bit of context, we did an event, or we've been doing, we have been, alhamdulillah, doing this series called Happily Ever After, where we're discussing some principles on not just how to get married, but how to stay married, meaning how to have healthy relationships and marriages, inshallah, moving forward. And so part of the goal of each session is to have a Q&A. The last session we had, we didn't have enough time for Q&A, so I wanted to extend it and have some question and answer, inshallah. And we were also planning on having just like a young professionals kind of bonfire hangout. Of course, there's nothing better than having a fireside in like 93-degree temperature. So what's going to melt first, you or the marshmallows? Alhamdulillah, Texas. So I wanted to get the Q&A going. The Q&A, I'd rather keep it anonymous, especially because, number one, we're live streaming, so you can message your questions in anonymously, but also secondarily, it's just nice to be able to know that you can ask a question, not have to worry about people knowing that you were asking it, etc. So I have the moderator board here on my iPad. So if you want to go ahead and you can go to slido.com and you can text in your question, inshallah. All right. They'll load up here. I'll get them. And we'll start to do a little Q&A. So any questions? So far we've done two sessions. Number one, we talked about the definition of marriage, not technical definition, but we talked about what does it mean to be in a relationship, a marital relationship. And number two, we talked about compatibility. And for those of you who weren't here, we went over what is compatibility and what isn't compatibility. So what is not compatibility are the things that oftentimes people confuse for compatibility, which is like, what do you like to watch? What do you like to read? What are your hobbies? These are all great conversation points, but they don't necessarily lead to compatibility. There's a lot of people that like to watch the same things that it doesn't work out. There's a lot of people that like to read or do the same hobbies that they don't have compatibility. So what does it mean to actually have true compatibility? We talked about companionship. Do you enjoy spending time with this person? Do you agree with the definition of what it means to be good? Right? That's a huge one. I mean, if you don't agree on what it means to be good, then how are you going to know that moving forward you're going to have the same values? How do you express emotions compatibility-wise? What's your method of nurturing people in your life? Or number one, do you nurture people? And then number two is like, how do you nurture people? And of course, there's physical attraction. Are you physically attracted to somebody? And intellectual stimulation. There's also a long list of other things when you're looking for or at somebody. If you're already married or engaged, don't worry. You can reevaluate. You can look at these things and try to find common ground. A lot of couples that are engaged, they got engaged off of like superficial connections. I was doing a nikah recently where I asked the couple, how did you meet? And she said, the girl told me that, my fiance was my dad's friend's son from college. I was like, that's cool. But I don't see that on the compatibility worksheet, right? On the list. So I was like, that's cool that you had that connect, I guess. But let's talk about how do you guys know that you're right for each other? Because your dads went to the same university, right? So a little bit of a wake-up call there. Okay? So some other things that you can reevaluate. Do you mutually trust one another, etc.? Allowing each other to be heard and considered. Do you feel heard in your relationship? Do you feel like when you talk to somebody, they're actually listening? Or do you feel like they're doing what most people do, which is listening to respond? Okay? Do you have respect for each other? Do you consider healthy time together? When I do some premarital counseling, one of the challenges that we have is defining what each person's social battery is. How many of you have a lower social battery than other people in your life? Okay? How many of you have a higher social battery? Do you know what I mean by this? Like you're more willing to hang out for longer periods of time. Yeah, it depends, right? Who am I socializing with? Okay, that's a fair answer. All right, so the point is that, again, if you have very different views on this, then naturally what's going to happen, 6 months, 1 year into your marriage, one person is going to want to be hanging out all the time with friends and family, and the other person is going to need, like, for every one hangout, I need 6 days to recover, right? Hiatus mode. I got to go off the grid for a bit. And then the one person is going to say, I feel like we're not spending time just together. And the other person's like, no, we are, but just with 12 other people. So again, these are things that are really, really important to sort of navigate before you commit for a lifelong journey. Emotional connection, genuine happiness together. These are things that, again, people don't consider. Everyone talks about compatibility from all the realms, but do you make each other happy? Genuinely happy. Not like the surface level happiness. Genuinely, right? Spiritual connection, meaningful relationship, truly understanding each other. Do you fight fair when you have arguments? If you're married, this also applies. Do you feel like one person fights unfairly? Because fights happen. It's a part of marriage. Disagreements are going to happen. But do you feel like when you disagree, you're able to negotiate those things in a way that is objective? Or are there personal shots that are taken and, the conversation gets derailed? Willingness to learn from each other, compatible values, chemistry, commitment. Are you both committed people? Because you could have a bunch of compatibility points, but if you're not committed, then it's not going to last, okay? So these are some of the points that we went over. We talked about how to look for somebody. We already went over this. We talked about putting yourself in a good environment, making sure that you put yourself in a situation where you might cross paths with somebody. I always tell people, they're like, how do I meet somebody? And we mentioned this before, that like meeting somebody is not a specifically Muslim problem, because you have people from all walks of life, all faith backgrounds, that are complaining about the same thing. I don't know where to meet somebody. I don't know how to meet somebody, right? For the experience of the average person who's not Muslim, it's going to be like the bar or the gym or something, right? Work, some sort of social environment. But obviously with the Muslim experience, we might have some more restrictions. And so we have to think critically about that. So how do you meet somebody? Well, if you don't know what values you have, then where do you know how to place yourself? You might meet someone in a venue that doesn't jive with who you are. So figuring out who you are and then going to environments or situations that connect with you on that level. For example, if you're somebody who really likes volunteering, giving back to the community, then finding opportunities for you to give back can potentially put you in an environment where you meet someone who also shares that same ethic, right? So that's an example. You have to know by who you are, what core values you're looking for. When people are in their 20s, early 20s, how many of you are in your early 20s right now? Okay. How many of you are in your mid-20s, 25 and up? How many of you are in your late 20s? How about 30s? Okay. So let me show you the graph of expectations as you approach your 30s. 20s, 30s. Okay? And as funny as that is, it's not because the expectations when you hit 30 are low, it's just that you started off really high. So by any measure of relativity, a person when they're 21, when they're looking to get married, they have all kinds of things on their checklist. All kinds of crazy stuff on their checklist, right? And then as they get a little bit older, a little bit more wise, a little bit more single, a little bit more scared, all of a sudden, that list of 25 things shrinks down to 18. And then eventually goes to 15, and eventually goes to 10. And eventually, it reaches a point where the person understands that, you know what? I can have as many points as I want on this list, but I'm probably not going to be able to find somebody if I keep having this really restrictive rubric. Okay? So you have to think about, what are your core values? What's an example of a core value? Who can share one? Family. Very good. I need this person to be family-oriented. That's not crazy. That's not a crazy ask, right? Religion, faith, absolutely. I want this person to share my faith values. Good. What else? Huh? Honesty, yeah, character. We can say character in general. I want this person to have a baseline of good character. What else? Even with religion, by the way, I want to be clear. What level of religion? What I always tell people, and this might be controversial, but it is what it is. I say that as long as the person believes and understands and agrees with the fact that we are, as Muslims, we are supposed to pray 5 times a day, and they try their best to do this. That is the starting point. Where do I get this from? You're like, where's this guy pulling this out of? The Prophet ﷺ was one time approached by companions that complained that there was a guy who used to steal. He was a very frequent thief, like he used to steal stuff. So when they told him, Ya Rasulullah, this person that we know is stealing a lot, the Prophet ﷺ only asked one question of him. Does he pray? And then when they responded in the affirmative, they said, yes, he prays. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, leave him, because if he prays, then one of his actions will leave, either the prayer or the stealing. And eventually, over time, the stealing left. So when I talk to people about, well, where do I draw the line, right? Because some people show up and they're like, I need this person to be fasting Mondays and Thursdays. I need this person to be giving this and that, whatever. And then I ask them, do you do that? They're like, no. So there's a lot of variance, right, between expectations. When I tell people what expectations should you have Islamically, I believe that the bare minimum should be prayer. Prayer. Do you believe that salah is a thing? And do you try your best to pray 5 daily prayers? Occasionally, of course, people will make mistakes. They'll slip. They'll miss. That's part of being human. But do you believe it? Are you committed to it? Okay? Without me having to convince you that it is. Are you internally committed to it? And then after that, of course, you can add whatever things you'd like. What are some other core values? Compassionate. We'll put that in with character a little bit. Hygiene. Yeah, I think that's like a human thing. Yeah, that's like a human thing. Huh? Spending, yeah. We're kind of going off of core values. I think what their understanding of quality of life is a good way of putting that. Because money and spending habits can go down a pretty quick, show me your Grubhub history. Show me your DoorDash frequency, right? Do you have a Dash Pass or not? What's that? Your bank statements. Well, I think quality of life. What are your expectations financially? That's a core value, for sure. Absolutely. But again, the more granular you get, the more isolated you're going to become. Okay? Anyone else? Huh? Yes. Although I will say that when it comes to understanding how to build a family, when 2 people are just meeting for marriage, they can have like bigger picture ideas, but of course those things will evolve. But I think a good way to put that, Miriam, is the willingness to explore, right? What are the correct means or the proper ways of rearing children? And a lot of times we have experience being raised ourselves, so we come from it from that perspective. Okay? Anyone else? These are really good. Anyone else? Long time and short time plans? Sure. Integrity, that's character as well. Okay? Good. These are good core values. I'm really happy no one said like fashion, how they dress. All these things can change. Marriage brings a lot of glow ups, right? It does. So you'll be fine there, inshallah. Okay, let's get to some questions now. And of course, let your trusted friends know. Networking is huge. And you know what else? Let me share with you also something really, really important. When you marry someone and you don't have any references for that person, you're entering into a really precarious situation, right? Again, it's entirely possible that person's a good person. But I always believe that everybody needs to at least have a couple references for who they're marrying. You need to be able to speak to somebody that knows this person on like a professional level or at least a social level. I think the mic is behind you. You got your mic? Okay, so letting your trusted friends know. Reach out to your network. See if they can help you out. But don't bring it up every time you hang out, because then you're not going to have very many trusted friends anymore. Stay patient and trust in Allah, right? I always tell people this. It happens very slowly until it happens, and then it goes very quickly. So you being patient and trusting in the process and not cutting corners is going to eventually pay off. Just stay the course, inshallah. Okay? All right, let's go back to the Slido code. So now we got a bunch of questions. Assalamu alaikum, Safi. How you doing? Safi just did a nikah. How meta. How meta of you. Okay? When getting to know someone for marriage, I'm going to ask you the questions. I'm done. I'm tired. I just came back from a flight from California and landed at 5:30. I'm tired. When getting to know someone for marriage, what is the best way to speak about a past that you are ashamed of before you corrected yourself?
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. How's it going? Alhamdulillah. I apologize for being late. I blocked 8 cars on my way here, so alhamdulillah. Someone's brother Diaz out there parking my car right now. Like a gentleman he is, alhamdulillah. First and foremost, happy to be here again with everybody. The question obviously is a really important one. You know, how to talk about a person's or your own past when meeting a new person and maneuvering that entire conversation. So obviously, I think Ustadh AbdelRahman will have good advice for this, but just my small advice from my own experience is. I know there are people that will say, oh, you have to be like 1,000% honest about every single detail that you lived in your life to a person that you're trying to marry. But the reality also is that there are certain things that take time to divulge. There are certain things that take time to kind of bring up in conversation. I think with time, trust and that camaraderie grows with people, right? To answer these questions in a very generic, one word answer type of way, I feel is actually not beneficial because there are actually not perfect answers for any of these questions, to be quite honest with you. So when it comes to this particular question, how do you discuss a difficult, past with a person that you're trying to get married to? I think one of the best ways to actually approach it is by assessing the situation to begin with, right? There has to be some level of courtesy. And without being too formal, there has to be some sense of like shame and modesty in conversation because a person, quite honestly, has not earned that trust yet, right? A person may not, in fact, have really known you too well. I mean, on a first moment of getting to know somebody, do I really feel comfortable with myself, divulging into my entire detail of the past that I've lived, right? So I think in the beginning, at least being a little bit more generic, discussing a little bit more of a kind of like a safe space type of mindset in the beginning, and then as the relationship progresses, I'm sure you guys have spoken about this already. As the relationship progresses through its phases and stages, and it gets more and more trustworthy, then there's room to kind of maneuver through some more detailed conversation. But I think from the beginning, I personally wouldn't say to express any detailed account of a person's past from the beginning, because again, at the end of the day, trust is something that is very, very difficult to build, and it's something that's very easy to break, right? So that would be kind of my short answer.
From the Islamic perspective, you're not obligated to tell anything. According to Sharia, you don't have to say anything, unless there is something that lives on after your mistake. If there's some element of it that remains. So from the Sharia, let's start there. What does Islam ask of you? Islam says that if Allah has hidden your sin and you've made repentance for it, you don't have to divulge it to anybody. Forget spouse. You don't have to tell your friends, nobody. Right? If you've made ta'ibu min adh-dhanb kaman la dhanba lahu. The Prophet ﷺ said, the one who repents from a sin is like the one who never made it. Kaman. Kaf here is equivocation, like exactly like. So that's number one. What Safi is alluding to is the reality on the ground, which is there will come about certain conversations in your marriage where things might just come up. Moments might be, resurfaced. And in those moments, there may come times where it becomes more obvious that you have made mistakes. I would still say that it is the wise and respectable thing that if you've moved on from something, that you should not indulge in talking about it at all. And that, to everybody in here who is concerned about, well, what if I marry someone that has a past? Well, the reality is, if you look at the Sahaba, like almost all of them had some kind of past, some type of past. So what you should be more concerned about is the person, have they concluded the past that they had, and have they moved over to have they turned over a new leaf? As long as the answer is affirmative, then there's no reason to go digging up someone's past behaviors. And the reality is that you might come across something and say, oh, you were dishonest. No, that's not true, actually. That's not true. The reality is that in the initial stages of marriage, right, the love and the appreciation is there, but trust takes a long time to develop. And if a person tests the integrity and the fiber of trust with information that's not contextualized, that is, in fact, the person's ashamed of, then they are not doing themselves a favor. So what I would recommend is, if you have conversations, allow anybody to open up as much as they need to. However, don't push them to go beyond what they're comfortable talking about. And my big advice is do not go looking for bad news. Do not go searching. Do not go texting. Don't go Instagram stalking. Don't message people, previous friends. Don't do it. As long as there is no reason to believe that that behavior is still present, do not do it. Because shaitan loves, right? What does Allah say? وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا إِنَّ بَعْدَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْدُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Allah says suspicion can be very bad. A lot of it is impermissible. Don't spy and don't backbite, because that's the logical flow of how things happen. Okay? So if you meet somebody and you are convinced of their character, your friends, your family has confidence, you have the references, all that, there's no reason to be like, what were you like in 2008? All right? There's no reason to go down that path. Okay? Now, if you do have something, whether it is, a previous relationship, let's say maybe you have a child from a relationship, or you contracted a disease or anything, you do have to disclose those things. You cannot hide things that still exist within you or around you as a result of those relationships. Okay? You have to be honest with that. Wallahu a'lam. That goes for chastity. If a person had sex before marriage and they repented for it, they don't have to disclose. Now, is it possible that there is a situation where that could be brought up in an environment of counseling that could in fact build rapport? It's possible. But again, every situation is so very different. It is so very different. Okay? So again, giving a one-word answer can sometimes be challenging, but we have to establish a baseline. And the baseline is, we do not entertain the idea of uncovering people's pasts, because quite frankly, it's already hard enough to get married. And I think a lot of people would find themselves very much turned away from certain situations. And honestly, everyone has a past to some degree. Next question. How do you differentiate between infatuation and chemistry? It's actually an easy question. It's actually an easy answer. The scholars say that infatuation is more of a trait of like the nafs, and so it's very quick. It's something that sort of doesn't really have much of a foundation. It's like a desire, right? It's like a craving. But chemistry is something that is much more substantive. It's much more whole. And so chemistry is something that can withstand a lot more. Infatuation is something where, to use your language, and by you I mean the generation of late 20s, early 30s, the first time you come across, an ick, infatuation's gone.
That's terrible.
Right? First time you come across an ick, like, what was the one that we saw? Yeah, this girl, right? One ick is that he's not good with his mom, but then another ick is that he's too close to his mom. So, so that's more the infatuation stage. Chemistry is when a person actually has relationship elements that are what? That are able to withstand a variety of different discussions, and even, dare I say, like disagreements or things that are different. Okay? Wallahu a'lam. All right, Safi. How do you know you're ready to get married?
Good question. How do you know you're ready to get married? I'm really against, before I answer the question of how do you know you're ready, I just wanted to share that I'm against the formalization of any particular age to get married. I've seen some of the most happy examples of marriages in my life of people who got married when they were in their 30s or mid to late 30s, and I've seen a lot of people go through difficulty in earlier on marriages as well. Obviously, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that he got married to Khadija radiallahu anha at a younger age, and then obviously from his circumstances he got married to other people at a later age. But how do you know you're ready to get married? We spoke about this in the first Happily Ever After session, right? About the knowledge of being able to be confident in the self before going out and looking for somebody, right? I think one of the best ways to learn that you're ready to get married is to understand the reasons of why not to get, how you know you're not ready to get married. Like if I'm searching to get married because I feel like I have a lot of personal issues in my life, so I need somebody else to basically solve those issues, I know that I'm not ready for it yet. If I'm looking to get married just because like all my friends around me are getting married and I'm like getting depressed going to weddings every other week in Dallas, Texas, and I just feel like that like tingling in my heart that I feel like I should get a move on myself. That's also another reason where I might have to think about it to myself that maybe that's not the right intention. That's maybe not the right cause for me to get married. But how do I know that I am ready to get married? I think a person who has calculatively sat down and thought to themselves what they intend out of this journey. I think a person who thinks to themselves that yes, I've sat down and I've thought to myself, this is where I feel confident in my own abilities and my own situation and my own kind of qualities that I can bring to a table, and now I'm ready to invite another person into this equation in my life, right? A lot of people think that they're ready to get married, and the first conversation they have with another person in that journey to get married, they're like, oh, yeah, this isn't it. This isn't for me. So I think confidence in the self, confidence in where you stand as a person being single is a big deal about a person being ready to get married. And to be quite honest with you, that will show in your search for a spouse. That a person who is confident within themselves, they won't have all these very, very obvious insecurities when they're speaking to other people. Right? So that's one of the main things that I'll share, inshallah.
Okay, I'm going to go through because we have a lot of questions. We're going to do like some lightning round type stuff. Okay. Enamored with a non-Muslim, what should I do? So this is obviously something that's going to come up a lot. So I will say this. I mentioned this last week when we had our session. And if I can just be very blunt, right? I want you to imagine meeting the Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. And I want you to imagine the prospect that you, as a result of this single choice, became the last Muslim in your entire lineage of your family. And when I say this, I'm not being dramatic. I have numerous examples, where people who decided to marry someone who was not Muslim for the sake of trying to find some universal connection or bond that did not end up turning out. It's different again if the person is actually interested and becomes Muslim. That's an entirely different conversation. That I'm all for. My dad was a convert to Islam. However, if a person sacrifices the future of Islam in their family because of a certain feeling or a crush or some love that they had for somebody, I want you to imagine explaining that to the Prophet ﷺ in person. After everything, after all that was done to preserve Islam through generations, that I really, really, I liked him or I liked her, I met them at work. The reality is, if we go back to those points about compatibility, and you find that there is significant difference in the belief of faith values, right? And this is why it's really dangerous to say things like, oh, we all believe the same thing. No, we don't. We don't. We believe in a lot of the same things. Don't get me wrong. I have numerous times welcomed anybody to Roots to come and learn. But the fact of the matter is that we believe in a person named Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam who is so absolutely critical and important to our understanding of what it means to be a Muslim, that if I'm sharing a home and a life and a bedroom and a family and a future with somebody that does not acknowledge him in the same way that I acknowledge him, how is that going to lead to the compatibility necessary for us to build a healthy family? How? And so many individuals come back after years of experimenting with this type of stuff, and I have seen nothing but regret. So let me speak to you from the future, right? If this is something that you're considering, let me tell you from the future what's going to happen, right? There will be a sense of regret. There will be difficulty. There will be struggle. And it will cause tension within your marriage. And that loving dating phase that you had is not going to last in the same way once the commitment starts to come through and once things get really serious. So just take it from me. Alhamdulillah, I've been married 15 years. I've been doing community work for a decade. I'm 35. I have the knees of a 60-year-old. Just take it from me. If you value your identity as a Muslim, don't ever let that be something that can be sacrificed. I understand that it is not easy. I get it. I deal with this question every day. How can I get married? How can I find someone to get married? I'm telling you that a little bit of patience will pay off, and your future generations will thank you for it. They will thank you for it, right? A lot of us may not even be qualified to go to heaven on our own, and will only enter Jannah because of the deeds that our children do. Like maybe I won't make it to heaven because of my deeds, but because Musa makes dua for me, I'll get elevated into Jannah. Am I willing to give up that opportunity? That my progeny won't be able to think and believe to pray for me after I've died? I've met children of families that did this, that were not Muslim, that talk about when it comes to bury their father, they show up to the masjid and they say, yeah, we wanted to cremate him, but in his will, for some reason, he said, don't cremate me. You cannot cremate me. And they still want to do it. And they come and they're like, they told us to ask the imam of a mosque if we're allowed to do this. The child speaking to me, who's in their 20s and 30s and 40s, is the child of a Muslim. And they're like, yeah, just tell us what we have to do to abide by his religious beliefs. And I sit there and I almost have to dissociate myself emotionally because I'm so heartbroken at the fact that this happened. And I have to just give the instructions almost like a robot, like ChatGPT. I just have to say, we have to perform this, the ghusl, janazah, this date, this time, this place. Because for me, if I were to emotionally enter myself in that conversation, I would just be devastated. So for a moment, when you are thinking about, I'm enamored, right? I actually like the fact that you use that word, because that word shows that you're not really in that deep. It's just an infatuation stage. Even if there's been long-standing relationship, trust me, it's not as substantive as you think it is. If it is, the person should be willing to talk about faith. And if they are, hey, I'm the son of Jim Murphy. There's no one that loves a convert marriage more than me. Right? I'm the product of it. No, seriously. But they have to be willing to talk about it. If they keep skirting it, no, this, we'll talk later. Can I just wear the rooster hat and we'll get married and then figure it out after? No. Who do you believe in? Right? You got to be like the angels in the grave. Who's your Lord? Who's your prophet? What book did he come with? No, seriously. Better now than there. Bars, right? Better now than there. So if the person really, truly sees your relationship and sees compatibility, then they should be willing to talk belief. They should. Okay? So please, 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 I'm begging you to think deeply about your compatibility when it comes to your faith, inshallah, inshallah. Okay? Sisters are having a hard time finding men who are practicing, mature, emotionally available, and financially stable. Wow. Dang. It's like that Kevin Hart video. Yeah, major ick. Major icks. Let me do the opposite. Sisters are only finding men who are not practicing, immature, they are emotionless, and they are broke.
Sounds like a really well.
Yeah. Where are you hanging out? Like, I don't understand. Like, where are you seeing these men? Like,
Find one of those.
yeah. Sometimes y'all too dramatic, man. I swear to God. Too dramatic. Should sisters compromise? This is a perfect example of a horrible question. Why? I'm sorry. I'm tired. This question's not fair. It's not fair. Okay? Let's seriously. Okay. Practicing. To what degree? Mature. How are we measuring this? Emotionally available. How are they supposed to do this for you before marriage? Right? Financially stable. You're not marrying a finished product. Why don't you help build somebody up to a point where they're doing this? Right? No, seriously. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that people should compromise on core values. However, I do think that there is a very uncanny search for what I like to call the finished product. And I am astounded by when I see this stuff. And I need to just shut off my social media, because some of the stuff that I see is like, oh, this needs to be this much money. This needs to be that. And then, you ask the person, they ask them, have you guys seen this video? What do you think the average income of is a person in your age range? And they're like, 300,000. And they find out it's like 68. They're like, oh, how is he going to afford my mahr then? And again, it's almost like there's this logical inconsistency. Now, am I painting every woman with this brush? No. But this kind of conversation, it spreads like wildfire, like toxic wildfire, right? So instead of speaking about each other in ways, oh, women are this and that, and they're hard-headed, and they don't want to be this and that, and men are immature and this and that, why don't we first identify what it is that we are looking for, and why don't we seek out things in a constructive way, in a positive way, instead of just saying, all these guys are all this, men are trash, women are this. Why? So the answer is, should you compromise? No, but it depends on what you mean by compromise. Like, are you already really unrealistic to begin with? If you are, then yeah, absolutely, you need to compromise. But if you are being a person that is level-headed, that has good friends, people that are older than you, advising you, telling you things like, hey, you know what? I know that you're coming from a situation where, this is the finances that you are expecting or whatever, but why don't you take a step back and look at the numbers and see what is rationally expected from a person at this stage in their career? And ultimately, at the end of the day, that might actually temper a lot of those expectations, where it's not compromise, but it's just level setting, right? It's level setting, okay? Also, brothers, if I could please, right? Call of Duty after 30, la yajuz. We're done with this. No more playing Xbox for 4 hours in Baba's basement, right? No more Taco Bell ordering at 11 p.m. None of this stuff, right? We need to start seeing a little bit more manliness, a little bit more masculinity, not toxic masculinity, masculinity amongst men. We need to start seeing more men that are willing to do the things that men do, right? A lot of times men get very, I see men spending more time on a haircut than they do for Dhuhr Salah, right? They're trying to find a barber and they're like, oh, okay, hour and a half. I need to get mid-fade just right. Come on, akhi. Let's figure this out, man. Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to turn ourselves into these manicured products, right? We need to be able to have, as the question very harshly put, we need to be able to have confidence in our spirituality as men. Are you praying 5 times a day? We need to be able to have financial aspirations. Are you working hard towards something? Towards something. Are you a person that has some level? When I first sat down with my father-in-law, who is Safi's dad, right, he's my brother-in-law, I remember they asked me, what's your plan? I proposed to my wife in college. They said, what's your plan? And I showed up with, the degree audit. You guys remember that? Where you click it and it shows you how many credits you have left or whatever. I showed up with that joint. I showed up with all of I've been working since I was 12. I was a paper boy. I showed up with my W-2s, right? I didn't get a W-2 when I was a paper boy, but I showed up with, when I worked at Apple, this and that, and I said, look, this is where I'm at. This is where I hope to be. This is my professional plan, and that's it. And honestly, because of the presentation, there was no room. But I deal with some situations where brothers show up and they're like, yeah, I'll get a job. My friend works here. He can get me a job. That's not very inspiring. As the father of a daughter, all right, man, see you later. So let's put some rigor to the structure of who you are. Let's add some strength, some meat to those bones, right? In the form of spirituality, of financial aspirations. No one's asking you to be a millionaire, but are you going to be able to pay rent? Are you going to be able to pay for car insurance? Are you still on your dad's cell phone plan? I saw a lot of people nodding. You should not be on your dad's cell phone plan right now. You should be paying for your dad's cell phone plan. If you're ready to get married, you should not be benefiting from your parents' insurance plans anymore. You should be paying for that stuff. Right? Yes or no? That's what I'm talking about. Right? So again, we're gonna have separate gender sessions because I feel like we need to have a little bit of a breakdown either way. But I do think the question is a little bit unfair. Just tone it back. Get some coffee, calm down, tone it back a little bit, inshallah. Okay? All right. Safi. Oh God, now is the brother version. I just saw it. I'm not gonna ask it. All right? Okay, in-laws are often an obstacle with marriage. How do we navigate the in-law clash?
Yeah, the in-laws. So, alhamdulillah, I think, I believe there are a certain set of, just general relationship standards that somebody should have when it comes to in-laws. But I also think that relationship should also be a very realistic one. Like we were talking about how, we just talked about realistic expectations and unrealistic expectations. I think a lot of people, first and foremost, before they get married, this is before marriage, by the way, you have to ask like the person who you're interested in marrying, what is the family dynamic actually? Because if you're getting into an in-law situation where there's like literally dinner at the in-law's house 3 times a week, you have to know that before getting in, so you don't complain about it after you already are in the marriage itself. So I think that's like an important piece of homework that somebody has to do. Like there shouldn't be a shock that like you have to go visit your in-laws once a week after you're married, even though that was disclosed way before the marriage contract was even signed. So I think that's something important to think about, right? So doing the homework even before you get married to this person, understand the family dynamic, whether that family is very, very family oriented, whether that family kind of just functions through its own units. I think that's something important to discuss before you even decide to get married to that person that you're interested in. So number 2 is to understand that with in-laws, and can I say one thing? And I don't know if this is like a personal experience, and maybe I'm going to inshallah kind of chime in on this. Being courteous does go a long way, honestly. I think I've seen enough in my life where I know that there's like this chip on the shoulder even before you get to know your in-laws. There are people who like go in with this like battleground mentality. When they see their in-laws, they already see like war.
Because they've watched Bollywood.
Yeah, I mean it's like they know their mother-in-law is going to try to suffocate them in their sleep. Like they're already envisioning it happening before it even like it's crazy. Like a father-in-law and a son-in-law don't have to hate each other. A mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law don't have to hate each other. These are not standards that are set by reality, honestly. Yeah. And so I think like tips on how to kind of maneuver that relationship is start being courteous even before marriage.
Yeah.
And this is really, and I've seen, and again, when we have people who are trying to get married in those stages of trying to get married, when they ask like, oh, I'm trying to get to know my significant other and yada yada yada, I'm like, well, have you like bought a present for that person's family yet? Have you talked to their brother? Have you talked to their sister? Have you kind of like even put in? The first thing I did for my mother-in-law before I got married is I bought her a vacuum cleaner.
Wow.
I saw her complaining about her.
So let me just give you a little coaching. You need to tell that part of the story first.
Yeah, I agree.
Before you say, you know what I bought for my mother-in-law, who's a female? A vacuum cleaner.
So I remember the first time I literally in person met my mother-in-law, she kept on complaining about how like all the stuff that she has in her house sucks. And I'm like, you know what would be a really great send-off gift for her to consider like me as a son-in-law? I'm like, hey, I'm literally going to stop by the store and drop this thing off that she was complaining about. And inshallah, and again, the Prophet talks about this.
Yeah.
When you give gifts to people, it really ties hearts together.
Yeah.
She also got like weirded out by the first time I was in her house and I started washing dishes after the family dinner. She was like astounded. She's also white. So she doesn't get it like basic people or like Arab people might. So like small little courtesies go a long way. I think without psyching yourself out about these like weird standards that like media sets for in-laws, I think start making your own tradition of what it is to have in-laws. So without any of those like negative kind of built connotations that are set by other people other than your own self.
It's also important to again start off on the right foot so that no one has a complaint against you. You can be mistreated to a certain point. There could be somebody that doesn't respond with courtesy. And the reality is that that's part of their nature. You can't change people. But, however, you should never let someone have an argument against your character. Okay? And this is difficult, it's challenging. Are there situations where there are certain in-law relationships that are indeed abusive? Yeah, of course. And I think that those are exceptional, right? We're talking about general standards here. But if a person has an exceptional relationship, meaning that this is something outside the norm, where my in-laws are in fact so obstructive and so intrusive and so hurtful that it's actually sabotaging the quality of my relationship with my spouse. Like, other than this negotiation or this moment, like he and I or she and I are fine, then there comes a different level of advice, okay? And I don't want to go too deep into this because that's a specific context, but I will say that a general principle is that if the in-laws are becoming so obstructive and intrusive that it is in fact damaging and sabotaging the marriage itself, which is otherwise fine, then you are allowed within the Sharia to take your space and to create those boundaries in a healthy way. That's a different conversation, but I just want you to know that that exists, okay? However, what Safi's mentioning about starting off on the right foot, always making sure that you're representing positivity, that you're being the person that's compassionate, that's generous, those are very important principles to master, okay? By the way, you can also have all that while still being very firm. You can have that while being firm, okay? You can be compassionate and gentle while being principled. Getting married as a convert or as a revert to Islam, you know, how to address this. Ultimately, it's actually something that is very similar in some ways. Obviously, there's differences. The main difference when it comes to being a convert to Islam, as I saw with even my own dad's situation, right, when we talked about this as we grew up, was the lack of a family network that would be able to connect people to other people who are looking for marriage. Because family network is typically where people begin. And then also the family references. So, Safi can speak to this because his wife converted to Islam, but the dynamic of negotiating the differences in family, okay, and the expectations, trying to navigate between what's culture and what's religious. I'll let Safi speak to this a little bit more, but one frame of reference that I want to give to everybody who is or who knows someone who converted to Islam is that the community becomes indispensable in matters like this. Not the community as a large body, but your village, specifically. Who are your close friends? Who are the people that you have iftar with? Who are the friends that taught you about Islam to begin with? Those people become, in a way, your chosen religious family. And they're the ones that can function in a lot of ways as the network and the searching, the search party, right, for you in that way. And that's really, really important because if you do go and meet someone and you're interested in marrying them, like I said earlier, people are going to want to know a lot about you. They're going to want to know reference-wise, like how can they trust that you're a good person? Don't take it personally. It's not offensive. They do the same thing with everybody. They do the same thing with everyone. When I was getting married to my wife, my father-in-law asked for references, and I gave him references, obviously, and people he called, and I coached them up a little bit, but the point being is that it's something that everybody goes through. So you are going to have to, as a convert to Islam, establish some of those reference points. And they should not be people of your same age or generation. You should have people that are a little bit older, uncles and aunties that you can connect with, people at the masjid. And ultimately, how do you forge these relationships? Involvement in the community. It's the same with everybody else. If someone's not involved in the community, and I've never seen them, I'll tell you a true story. Someone walked in here after Monday night. Okay, if you've been here at Heartwork, you know why I'm laughing. An uncle walked in here after Monday night, and he said, "There's a brother who comes to Heartwork that proposed to my daughter, and he said that you can vouch for him." And I said, "Oh, which one?" And then he holds up a picture, and I'm like, I've never seen that dude before. Like, I've barely maybe seen him. I think he orders a white chocolate latte, which is already a red flag. But I said, I don't know that guy. And I thought to myself, subhanAllah, if I'm that person, what did he do wrong? Well, he should have come to me. He should have sat with me. He should have said, "AbdelRahman, is it okay? I'm trying to propose to this girl. I really like her. I want to marry her. And her dad is asking for references. I know that you don't know me that well because I only see you here. Can we get coffee? It's not like we don't have a coffee shop. Can we have coffee together and sit and you can ask me questions. That way, when someone comes as a reference, you feel more comfortable giving me your stamp of approval. But this dude just went ahead and said, yeah, that guy up there, he knows me. No, homie, I don't know you, right? And so I told the father what I said. I said, uncle, with all due respect, I think he does come here. I've seen him sit here, but I'm not saying he's a bad person, but I absolutely cannot tell you his character. I don't know him that well. So I'm not saying no, but I'm also not saying yes, right? So I don't want to be the person that gets put on that list, okay? So reference building is something that everybody has to do. And if you are someone who converted to Islam, it's even of more paramount importance because you sort of have to build it a little bit more organically, or a little bit more synthetically. It didn't happen organically for you, okay? Allah make it easy, inshallah. We got a question on meher. Can you please, someone just wrote meher, unrealistic expectations. Can you please touch on the topic of meher, what it should be and how it should be calculated? Some unrealistic expectations. From the Sharia, the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us that the simplest of meher is the best meher. The simple meher is the best meher. What does that mean, simple? Well, there's a little bit of discussion about that. But generally speaking, the idea of meher being an insurance clause in the contract is not correct. There are different stipulations in the Islamic marriage contract where a person could have, for example, a meher and a mu'akhar. Or they can have a meher and they can have one that is immediate, one that is deferred. Or in Islam, it is incredibly useful to have what we call in English a prenuptial agreement. That if a person does in fact terminate this marriage, that these are the financial responsibilities that we have. These are what we agree on financially, okay? I am a firm believer, and this goes to another question, that everybody who gets married should have a prenup. Everybody. I know it's not the happiest thing to talk about. You're getting married and you're like looking at each other and you're like in love and you're like, let's talk about divorce if we get divorced. Marriages are happy things, but contracts are worst case scenario documents. You have to build them. And I know it's not fun, but you have to, because you know what's even less fun is when you don't have them and something happens. So you have to go through with a third party, with a lawyer, with a counselor, and everybody involved. You have to go through and you have to explore if this marriage were to dissolve. And by the way, there's many ways that it can dissolve. It can dissolve through divorce. It can dissolve through untimely death. There's many ways, right? So you have to discuss some of these points and go through them. But when it comes to meher, we know that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ said that the simplest of meher is the best of meher. Brothers, that's not like I don't want you to memorize that narration, and the sanad all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ and recite it at your rishta. That's probably not a good look. However, there is a general reasonable expectation. For everybody, it's going to be a little bit different. If I were you, sisters, read the room. Just read the room. Like if what you're asking for is more than this person makes annually, just read the room. Man, Clubhouse was a horrible, horrible time. When Clubhouse, I heard Clubhouse was like the great nefs revealer. You guys know what Clubhouse is? Oh man, if you don't know what Clubhouse is, just say alhamdulillah and fast for 10 days to thank Allah. Clubhouse, those rooms on marriage were like so god-awful and shocking. People were revealing so much. I think COVID was driving everyone insane, and they were just like, when I ask for meher, it's going to be at least a quarter mil at least. And I'm like, what on earth does that, you know what I mean? Like, how on earth? And then there's the tension, right? Women are just seeking money, men are broke, and that leads to a huge canyon between. So when it comes to meher, just read the room a little bit. Read the room a little bit. The prenup, the divorce clause, those are not part of meher. A person should not say, oh, give me this much in case you divorce me. That's not the meher. The meher is a gift that the groom gives to the bride, not her family, right? Your brother, the sister's getting married, your brother's like sitting back there like waiting to get his Xbox. No, right? That's not for him. It's for you only, and it's a gift, and it's for you exclusively. But it's also not meant to be an insurance clause. That comes in a different form in the contract. Okay? Safi, can I continue vaping through marriage? Secret. So we're not going to laugh because maybe it's a serious question. But what do you think about maybe bad habits that people have in marriage, and they wrote secret? Any bad habit. Vaping is one example.
Well, I think that, this goes without saying. I think this goes without saying, but I think that obviously having anything secretive in a marriage especially something that's that individual it can be harmful immediately, and it can be very deadly long term. So just my honest advice is, I'm not saying that like a husband and wife have to like share each other's text messages like every single night before they go to bed religiously. But what I'm saying is that it is really, really, not advised at all to do anything that's, that's that habitual on a secretive level. Not saying that like there are things that we're all struggling with that we're not proud of, right? But to say on a day of a marriage that I'm deciding to basically go into this contract and this marriage with you that is literally overseen by Allah, and to hide something like that and having the hopes of like that just resolving randomly, I think it's a little bit far-fetched. So my just humble suggestion is to make sure that whatever that habit, and again, if it's out of guilt and shame, no sort of spiritual I guess any sort of spiritual guilt for that, but just make sure that it's something that you're either working on or it's something that you're completely 100% avoiding if possible at all, because it will just lead to a lot of pain and heartbreak.
And from the Sharia, you have to disclose things that have an effect on somebody. Okay, if it's something personal, like if you eat Cinnamon Toast Crunch every night at midnight, if we eat Cinnamon Toast Crunch every night at midnight, right? That's my problem. No, if you like drinking Coke Zero, that's not necessarily something that affects the other person. Vaping, according to the recent data on it, right, from the World Health Organization and from other medical journals, it will in fact have an effect on your household. So it is something that you do need to disclose. Right? Anything that has an effect on the opposite, or not opposite, on your counterpart, you have to disclose that. Okay, medically, that is something. If you have, if you're struggling with mental wellness, you have to disclose that. You have to. If you don't disclose it, then the marriage contract can become void instantly, because it's something that is, in Sharia, it would be considered an invalid contract because you didn't disclose all relative points of the contract. Okay. All right, quick lightning round because Maghrib has come in. If you have a broken family dynamic, would you recommend putting marriage off until your current family improves? There's a lot of questions like this. Would you recommend putting marriage off until this? Operate in the world with a framework of 2 points. Number 1 is bare minimum threshold, and number 2 is ideal. Everyone should have a bare minimum threshold of how they can function, because no one's going to have the ideal all the time. Okay? So, for example, there's a bare minimum financial threshold that allows a person to get married. That doesn't mean that the person doesn't have ideals that they're aspiring towards. But there should be a bare minimum. Things like rent, groceries, insurance, a car payment, etc. Okay? There's a bare minimum religious threshold. What did I say it was? Prayer, 5 times a day. A person should be striving to pray 5 times a day religiously and really working on that to know that they are religiously ready for the most part to get married. That's the bare minimum. Is that where they stop? Of course not. We all want to get better religiously. So operate with that framework. So when you look at your family and you look at the dynamic being a little bit challenging, have the functional threshold. What is the functional level of threshold that my family needs to be operating at? And what is the ideal? The ideal, of course, is a family that has equilibrium, where everyone's in harmony, in sync. Of course, inshallah, Allah grants us that. But not everyone's family is like that. In fact, everyone's family has their own vulnerabilities, their skeletons, etc. Okay? So, is your family operating at a functional enough state to where you would be able to have a relationship with another person and their family? If the answer is yes, then that's fine. But meaning, is there just personal drama, like in the home? But if it's something where if you bring someone else into this family dynamic, it's going to become destructive, then you might have to reconsider or at least disclose that to the person so that they become ready for that, okay? As a man post-marriage, how do you balance respect of the father-in-law's decisions and understanding that you are now a decision maker in your newly formed family? It takes time. It takes time. If you're asking this question 6 days after your nikah or 6 months or 6 years, it takes time. And there's going to be different things that look at it. But really, when it comes from man to man, when it comes to earning another man's respect, it all is about establishing what? Reputation. And building that portfolio. If you want to show me you're responsible, don't tell me, show me. Show me you're responsible. Be the person that takes care of things. And I won't have to make decisions for you. Right? So that's one way to do it, is demonstrate your responsibility. if as a man I'm obligated to be the provider for my family, am I obligated to make sacrifices for my wife's career? This is all an interpersonal conversation. There is nothing in Sharia that obligates who someone has to be in a relationship. There is a default that Islam sets, because with no default you have chaos. So the default is the primary breadwinner is the husband, and the one who takes care of the situation at home is the wife. That's the default. However, it's up for discussion. It's not something that is obligated or mandatory. Meaning, if a husband does not go out there and earn, is he sinful? No, not necessarily, because these are conversations that have to happen. And as you get married, you realize that sometimes these things change and they shift. I had a really good friend of mine who got laid off. His wife took the reins of earning. He took care of the kids at home. Year and a half did that. MashaAllah, he got another job. She was able to dial back, right? A lot of these black and white scenarios, they don't really play out in real life. And if a person is absolutely unwilling to have those conversations after he gets laid off and he's still not letting his wife work, what happens to the family? Right? You have to be a wise captain. You can't just be a forceful captain. You have to be a wise captain. Okay? So don't walk into it with the predetermined black and white. You have to be able to understand how to navigate the landscape. Okay? So these are all interpersonal conversations. Premarital counseling for everybody, please. It's not like Oprah. I'm not like giving it to you. I'm telling you, everyone should do this, inshallah. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up there, because the rest of the questions now, we got to how much riz is permissible. And that's how you know it's time to end the session, right? You probably should not be here if you ask that question with that vocabulary. Yeah, literally. Go pray Salat al-Maghrib, please. But honestly, we're going to try to do these more frequently, inshallah. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people asking a lot of questions, so we want to be able to offer this as a solution. We ask Allah Ta'ala to make it easy for us, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. After Maghrib, join us outside.